Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. For over 4,500 years, a single colossal monument has dominated the desert landscape, a silent testament to a civilization that reached for the heavens. It is the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing, a mountain of stone built with a precision that baffles modern engineers. How did a Bronze Age society, with only the simplest of tools, construct this architectural marvel? What secrets are sealed within its hidden chambers? Join us as we journey back in time to uncover the complete story of the Great Pyramid of Giza, from the ambitious vision of a powerful pharaoh to the enduring mystery that captivates us to this day. Before a single stone of the Great Pyramid was laid, before the name Khufu echoed through eternity, Egypt was a land of gradual yet monumental transformation. This was the dawn of an era, a period stretching back through centuries of unification, innovation, and the consolidation of divine kingship. The story begins not with a single pharaoh, but with the very concept of a unified Egypt. Around 3100 BC, the legendary King Narmer brought the disparate lands of Upper and Lower Egypt under one crown, an act immortalized on his famous palette. This unification wasn't merely a political victory, it was the birth of a civilization, a centralized state with the power to mobilize resources and manpower on an unprecedented scale. For nearly half a millennium, these early rulers of the first dynasties established the foundations of pharaonic power. They were not yet builders of true pyramids, but their tombs, known as mastabas, were significant structures in their own right. These flat-roofed rectangular buildings of mud brick, with their subterranean burial chambers, were the architectural ancestors of the pyramids, houses for eternity that grew in complexity with each successive reign. The crucial leap occurred during the Third Dynasty with Pharaoh Djoser and his brilliant vizier Imhotep. At Saqqara, they conceived of something revolutionary, stacking 6 mastabas of decreasing size one on top of another. The result was the Step Pyramid, the world's first colossal stone building, a veritable stairway to the heavens for the divine king. This was the prototype, the grand experiment that proved such monumental construction was possible. The Fourth Dynasty, Khufu's own lineage, took this innovation to its zenith. His father, Pharaoh Sneferu, was arguably the greatest pyramid builder of all. His reign was a period of intense architectural experimentation, a necessary learning curve. He built not 1, but 3 massive pyramids: the collapsed pyramid at Meidum, the uniquely shaped bent pyramid at Dashur, and finally, the first successful, true, smooth-sided pyramid, the Red Pyramid. Sneferu's trials and triumphs paved the way, perfecting the techniques and organizing the state machinery required for a project that would dwarf all others. The stage was now set, the technology was proven, the workforce was organized, and the religious ideology of the divine king demanding a path to the stars was firmly entrenched. Egypt was poised on the brink of its most audacious project, waiting for a ruler with the ambition, resources, and vision to command its creation. That ruler was Khufu. When Khufu ascended to the throne of the two lands around 2589 BC, he inherited more than just a kingdom. He inherited a divine mandate. In the theology of Old Kingdom Egypt, the pharaoh was no mere mortal. He was the living embodiment of the god Horus, a celestial deity walking among men. His reign was the earthly reflection of cosmic order, and his death was not an end, but a transition. He was destined to journey through the underworld and be reborn in the afterlife, joining his father, the sun god Ra, in his daily voyage across the sky. This profound belief system was the driving force behind the grandest construction project in human history. Khufu's ambition was not born of simple vanity or a desire for a lavish tomb. It was a state-sponsored religious imperative. The Great Pyramid was conceived as a resurrection machine, an architectural vessel designed to facilitate his cosmic journey and ensure the eternal stability of Egypt itself. His vision was to create a monument that transcended everything that had come before. His father, Sneferu, had built 3 pyramids, perfecting the form. Khufu would build only one, but it would be a structure of such scale, precision, and perfection that it would stand as the ultimate symbol of pharaonic power. Its gleaming white limestone casing would reflect the sun's rays, a man-made mountain of light connecting the earth to the heavens. The sheer scale of his ambition is staggering. The Red Pyramid, his father's greatest success, was already a massive structure. Yet Khufu planned for a pyramid that was taller, steeper, and vastly more voluminous, requiring an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing over 80 tons. This required a logistical operation on a scale the world had never seen, a testament to the absolute control he wielded over his kingdom's resources, from its quarries and forests to its people. This was not just building. It was a national mobilization, a quarter-century-long effort that would engage the brightest minds and strongest backs in the service of a single divine vision. Khufu's ambition was to build a stairway to the stars, a permanent fixture in the landscape that would guarantee his immortality and proclaim the eternal glory of his reign for all time. The creation of a monument intended to last for eternity begins with its foundation. The decision to build on what we now call the Giza Plateau was one of the most critical choices in the entire project. A calculated decision based on a confluence of practical geology, logistical necessity, and profound religious symbolism. This was not a random patch of desert. It was carefully selected sacred ground. Geologically, the plateau was perfect. It offered a solid, stable bedrock of limestone, a massive, flat shelf capable of supporting the colossal weight of the future pyramid, which would eventually top 5.9 million tons. Building on softer sand or less stable ground would have been catastrophic, leading to subsidence and collapse. The Giza bedrock provided the unyielding anchor required for Khufu's eternal vision. The plateau's location was also a logistical masterstroke. It was situated just west of the ancient capital of Memphis, the administrative heart of the kingdom, allowing for efficient oversight and management of the massive project. Crucially, it was perched on the edge of the Nile's annual inundation plain. During the flood season, the river would rise, transforming the landscape and allowing barges laden with heavy granite from Aswan and fine white limestone from Tura to be floated almost to the base of the construction site. This waterway was the lifeblood of the project, the highway upon which the pyramid's essential materials traveled. Beyond the practical, the location was steeped in religious meaning. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, the west was the direction of the setting sun, and therefore the land of the dead. All previous pyramids and major tombs were built on the west bank of the Nile, the symbolic portal to the afterlife. Giza's elevation also gave it prominence allowing the pyramid to be seen for miles around, a constant reminder of the pharaoh's power and his connection to the gods. Furthermore, there is compelling evidence that the site was chosen for its astronomical alignments. The pyramids of Giza appear to mirror the stars in Orion's belt, a constellation the Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of the underworld and resurrection. By placing his pyramid here, Khufu was not just building on solid rock. He was anchoring his eternal destiny to the very fabric of the cosmos. The Giza Plateau was where the earthly and the divine could meet. Behind every great king is a brilliant mind, and behind Khufu's pyramid was his vizier, Hemiunu. While the pharaoh provided the divine vision and the royal command, it was Hemiunu, a man believed to be Khufu's own nephew, who was the grand architect, the master of works, who translated that colossal ambition into a tangible, achievable plan. A life-sized statue found in his tomb at Giza depicts a man of substance and authority, the face of the calm, confident genius required to orchestrate the most complex engineering project of the ancient world. His official titles included overseer of all construction projects of the king, leaving little doubt as to his role. Hemiunu's master plan was a symphony of mathematics, logistics, and human management. His first task was to achieve a level of precision that remains astonishing to this day. He oriented the pyramid's base to the 4 cardinal points with an accuracy of within 1/15 of a single degree. The base itself, covering 13 acres, is almost perfectly level, with a variance of less than an inch from one side to the other. This foundational precision was non-negotiable. Any error would be magnified catastrophically as the structure rose. Within this perfect exterior, Hemiunu designed an intricate network of internal passages and chambers. Unlike Djoser's step pyramid, which had a relatively simple subterranean chamber, Khufu's pyramid contained a complex system within its superstructure. The plan included a descending passage leading to an unfinished subterranean chamber, an ascending passage, the majestic Grand Gallery, the so-called Queen's Chamber, and finally, the King's Chamber, lined with massive granite blocks and protected by a series of relieving chambers to distribute the immense weight above it. This was architectural innovation on a breathtaking scale. But his plan went far beyond blueprints. Hemiunu was the chief operating officer of a nationwide enterprise. He had to manage the quarrying of millions of stone blocks, their transportation via the Nile, and their final placement on the rising structure. He oversaw a city of workers, skilled craftsmen, masons, surveyors, and laborers, ensuring they were housed, fed, and organized into efficient teams. Hemiunu's plan was the central nervous system of the entire operation, a testament to a singular intellect that could command stone, water, and thousands of men to create a monument for eternity. By the autumn of 1936, the affair between King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson was no longer a secret whispered in the corridors of power. It was a looming constitutional storm. A silent, powerful machine was beginning to mobilize against them, its architects the very pillars of the British establishment. This was not a populist uprising, but a calculated construction of opposition, built block by heavy block by the men who considered themselves the guardians of the monarchy. The chief builder was Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin. A shrewd and deeply traditional politician, Baldwin saw the king's infatuation not as a private matter of the heart, but as a direct threat to the integrity of the crown and the stability of the empire. He began to hold clandestine meetings with senior ministers and courtiers, laying the foundations for what would become an immovable wall of resistance. Another key architect was Cosmo Gordon Lang, the Archbishop of Canterbury. As the spiritual head of the Church of England, of which Edward was the supreme governor, Lang was appalled. The notion of a monarch marrying a twice-divorced woman was, in his eyes, a moral and theological impossibility. It would defile the sacred office of the king and create a schism between the crown and the church. He began to exert his considerable influence, framing the issue as a matter of national virtue. The old guard at Buckingham Palace, men like the king's private secretary, Alec Hardinge, also began to work against their sovereign. They saw Edward's behavior as reckless, a dereliction of duty that prioritized personal desire over 1,000 years of tradition. They controlled the flow of information to the king, subtly isolating him and reinforcing the government's position. While the British press maintained a voluntary, almost surreal silence, the story was raging in American and European newspapers, creating a pressure cooker environment. The builders of this pyramid of opposition knew that when the dam of silence finally broke in Britain, public opinion needed to be firmly on their side. They were not just advising the king, they were constructing his cage, meticulously assembling the arguments and leveraging the institutions that would ultimately force him to choose between his love and his throne. The crisis was not born of whimsy or fleeting passion. It was hewn from the bedrock of British law, religion, and social convention. To understand the establishment's unyielding stance, one must journey into the quarries of the conflict, to the raw, intractable materials that made Wallis Simpson so utterly unacceptable as a future queen consort. The first quarry was her marital history. In the 1930s, divorce carried a profound social stigma, but for the Church of England, it was a matter of doctrine. The Church did not recognize remarriage after divorce if the former spouse was still living. As supreme governor of that same church, Edward was expected to be its ultimate defender. For him to marry Wallis, a woman with 2 living ex-husbands, was a constitutional and religious paradox that Stanley Baldwin and the Archbishop could not resolve. It was a square peg for a round, sacred hole. The second, deeper quarry was her nationality and character. In the eyes of the aristocracy and the government, she was an American commoner, an adventuress. Whispers and official reports, some fueled by little more than xenophobia and class snobbery, painted her as a manipulative, socially ambitious woman who held a dangerous, almost hypnotic influence over the king. They questioned her motives, her past, and her suitability to stand beside the monarch of a quarter of the world's population. These were not just personal prejudices. They were seen as legitimate concerns about the character of a potential queen. The king, for his part, was carving his own reality. He believed his personal happiness was paramount, and that his people would eventually accept Wallis if he presented her as his wife. He was quarrying his own desires against the ancient stone of the monarchy. This created the fundamental clash. The government was carving out the legal and moral arguments for why this union could never happen, while Edward was carving out a space in his royal life for a woman the system was designed to repel. The lines were being etched into the earth, deep and irreversible. The conflict was no longer just about 2 people in love. It was about the unmovable stone of tradition versus the irresistible force of a modern monarch's will. As the crisis escalated, its key players were separated by geography, but connected by a torrent of communication, a veritable highway of frantic messages, ultimatums, and heartfelt pleas. This flow of information, like the Nile, carried the heavy, monumental weight of the decisions being made. The first megalith to be transported was Wallis herself. As the foreign press circled and the threat of the story breaking in Britain grew imminent, she was advised to leave the country. Under the cover of darkness, she fled to the south of France, taking up residence at the villa of her friends, Herman and Catherine Rogers. This physical separation turned the crisis into a long-distance affair, conducted over crackling telephone lines that stretched from Fort Belvedere, the king's private residence, to Cannes. These calls became Edward's lifeline and, in the government's view, a dangerous conduit for Wallis's influence. He would spend hours on the phone, reassuring her, strategizing, and reaffirming his commitment, all while his ministers waited for an audience. The official highway of communication between the king and his government was equally fraught. Stanley Baldwin made several trips to Fort Belvedere to deliver his grave messages in person. But the primary courier for the heaviest burdens was the king's trusted advisor, Walter Monckton. He shuttled between the prime minister and the monarch, transporting the stark realities of the government's position and the unwavering resolve of the king. He was the barge master, tasked with navigating the treacherous currents between two immovable forces. The most turbulent current was the international press. While Britain remained an island of official silence, newspapers in the United States and across the Commonwealth were emblazoned with headlines about King Wally. These stories flowed back to the UK, creating immense pressure on the government and the monarchy. The megalith of public scandal was being transported across the oceans, and Baldwin knew it was only a matter of time before it arrived on British shores, forcing the final, cataclysmic confrontation. The highway was now aflood, carrying the fate of a king and his kingdom toward its inevitable delta. By early December 1936, the time for negotiation was over. The moment had come to lay the foundations for the future, a future that would be permanent, unalterable, and written in the stars of history. King Edward VIII was forced to align his personal destiny with his royal duty, only to find they were constellations in different parts of the sky. Stanley Baldwin made his final journey to Fort Belvedere to present the king with the stark architectural plans for what was to come. There were no more compromises, no more delays. There were only three paths, three foundations upon which the rest of his life and the life of the monarchy could be built. The first option was for Edward to renounce Wallis Simpson. He could remain king, but he would have to give up the woman he loved. For Edward, this was an emotional impossibility, a foundation of misery he was unwilling to build upon. The second option was for the king to ignore his minister's advice and proceed with the marriage. Baldwin made it clear that if he did so, the entire government would resign. This would force a general election, a political war fought not on policy, but on the king's right to marry. It would drag the crown into the dirt of party politics, a constitutional catastrophe that Edward, for all his stubbornness, was not prepared to inflict upon his country. This left only the third, unthinkable option: abdication. He could have the woman he loved, but he would have to surrender the throne, the empire, and the life he was born to lead. He would have to lay the foundation for a new, uncertain eternity in exile. For Edward, the choice was agonizing, but clear. He had to align with his own star, the star of his love for Wallis. He chose her. On December 10, 1936, he signed the Instrument of Abdication, a single document that dismantled a destiny and laid the foundation for a new one. The stars had been consulted, a choice had been made, and the House of Windsor would now be rebuilt under his brother, George VI. For Edward and Wallis, their shared eternity was about to begin, not in a palace, but in a world of their own making, forever defined by the love that had cost a kingdom. By the autumn of 1936, the crisis was no longer a secret worry whispered in the corridors of power. It was a looming constitutional catastrophe requiring a solution. The central problem was an engineering one: how to build a ramp that could elevate Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee on the cusp of her second divorce, to a position alongside the King of England, without bringing the entire structure of the monarchy crashing down. Several theories were proposed, each more controversial than the last. The king's preferred design was the most audacious: a straightforward marriage, making Wallis his queen. To Edward, this was the only path, a direct ramp to personal happiness. But to the establishment, this was an architectural impossibility. The monarch was the supreme governor of the Church of England, an institution that did not recognize divorce, let alone permit the remarriage of a divorcee while her former spouse was still living. The very foundations of church and state would fracture under such a strain. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, the project's chief engineer, presented an alternative blueprint: the morganatic marriage. This was a complex, almost theoretical design, a compromise intended to shore up the monarchy's crumbling facade. Under this plan, Edward could marry Wallis, but she would not become queen. She would be granted a lesser title, perhaps Duchess of Cornwall. And crucially, any children they had would be barred from the line of succession. It was a clever theory, an attempt to build a separate, lower platform for Wallis next to the throne. But when Baldwin consulted the engineers of the wider empire, the Dominion prime ministers of Canada, Australia, South Africa, and the others, the theory was resoundingly rejected. They saw it as a constitutional fudge, a bespoke solution that would weaken the crown's integrity across the globe. They would not support the necessary legislation. The controversy raged. The king, stubbornly attached to his own design, believed he could rally public support and force the government's hand. He was the master builder, and this was his monument. But he failed to see that the materials he was working with, tradition, religion, and constitutional law, were not malleable. They were ancient, unyielding stone. Every proposed ramp, every theoretical solution, was found to be structurally unsound. The chasm between the king's desire and his duty was simply too wide to bridge. To truly understand the abdication, one must venture deep inside the political mountain, past the constitutional debates and the public outcry, to its very core, the king's chamber. This was not a physical room in Buckingham Palace or Fort Belvedere, but the sealed, private space of Edward VIII's own heart and mind. Here, logic and duty held no sway. The chamber was governed by a single absolute law: his all-consuming love for Wallis Simpson. For years, Edward had felt like a prisoner of his royal destiny. He chafed under the rigid formality, the endless ceremony, the crushing weight of expectation. He was the charismatic, modern Prince of Wales, but he was profoundly lonely and unfulfilled. Wallis Simpson entered this gilded cage and offered him something he had never known: an escape. She was, in his eyes, everything the court was not. She was witty, direct, intelligent, and unimpressed by his title. She treated him not as a symbol, but as a man. She organized his life, decorated his homes, and provided the emotional anchor he so desperately craved. In his letters, he referred to her as his perfect woman. This devotion was the central, immovable object around which the entire crisis revolved. While Baldwin and the courtiers saw Wallis as a political problem to be managed, Edward saw her as the very reason for his existence. His ministers came to him with arguments of state, of empire, of duty to the throne his ancestors had occupied for 1,000 years. They tried to breach the walls of his private chamber, to reason with him, but they found it impenetrable. Inside, the king had already made his choice. The world outside could debate the consequences, but the decision itself was made in the quiet, isolated heart of the man. He famously told his mother, Queen Mary, that he could not continue without Wallis, stating, "I cannot live my life without her." This was not a negotiating position. It was a fundamental truth from the king's chamber. The British monarchy, that great mountain of tradition and power, was ultimately forced to reshape itself around this single, unshakable conviction. The heart of the king would not yield, and so the mountain itself had to move. The final days of the reign of King Edward VIII were a solemn, historic procession down a grand gallery toward an unprecedented conclusion. This was not a corridor of celebration, but a passage of abdication. And for Edward, it was his stairway to a personal heaven with Wallis, a destination that required him to descend from the most famous throne on earth. By December, all alternative routes were sealed. The morganatic marriage was rejected. The government was immovable, and the king's mind was made up. The formal process began. The instrument of abdication was drafted, a simple but seismic document that would sever the ancient line of succession. On December 10, 1936, at his country home, Fort Belvedere, the final somber steps were taken. Edward gathered his 3 brothers, Albert, the Duke of York, who would reluctantly become King George VI, Henry, the Duke of Gloucester, and George, the Duke of Kent. In this grand gallery of royal blood, before his own siblings, he signed the document. I, Edward VIII, of Great Britain, Ireland, and the British dominions beyond the seas, King, Emperor of India, do hereby declare my irrevocable determination to renounce the throne for myself and for my descendants. With a few strokes of a pen, a reign was over. The crown passed instantly to his brother. The next day, the man who was now merely Prince Edward, the Duke of Windsor, took his final walk down the gallery to face his people. From a room in Windsor Castle, he sat before a BBC microphone to deliver one of the most famous radio addresses in history. This was his stairway, his final explanation before ascending into a new life of exile. He spoke not as a monarch, but as a man. You must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. The speech was a masterpiece of personal appeal, ending with a heartfelt, "God bless you all. God save the king," as he pledged allegiance to his brother. The broadcast ended. Prince Edward left Windsor Castle and within hours boarded a destroyer. sailing away from the kingdom he had given up. The Grand Gallery had led him out of the palace and into the unknown, a private citizen in pursuit of his own heaven. To the British establishment, Wallis Simpson was an inscrutable monument, a structure whose internal architecture they desperately sought to map. She was the enigma at the heart of their king's obsession, a queen's chamber he was determined to enter, yet one they believed was fundamentally unsound. Unlike the queens who came before, her past was not a well-documented lineage, but a series of sealed passages and unexplored shafts. Investigators, dispatched by those who feared her influence, delved into her history, trying to trace the path that led this twice-divorced American socialite to the steps of the throne. They followed the shafts of her life back to Baltimore, to her first marriage to naval aviator Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., a union marred by his alcoholism and instability. They explored her time in China, a period shrouded in rumor and speculation, with whispers of affairs and secrets learned in the salons of Shanghai and Beijing. Her second marriage, to the quiet and respectable Ernest Simpson, was the vessel that brought her to London. But even that chamber offered few clear answers. To her detractors, these shafts led not to a noble core, but to a hollow center, driven by ambition and a hunger for status. They saw a woman who had mastered the art of charming powerful men, a calculating figure whose ultimate prize was the British crown. Yet, to Edward, these same passages were evidence of a life lived, of resilience and worldly sophistication that he found intoxicatingly different from the cloistered aristocracy he knew. He saw not a hollow chamber, but a vibrant, complex inner world. The shafts that investigators saw as dead ends, he saw as proof of her depth and mystery. The more the establishment tried to probe and define her, the more they found their tools inadequate. Wallis remained an enigma, a locked chamber whose only key was held by the king himself, and he refused to let anyone else look inside, leaving a nation to wonder what secrets or what emptiness lay within. Every monarchy is a great pyramid, built over centuries, and its crowning glory, the final act of its construction, is the coronation. The pyramidion, the gleaming capstone, is the monarch, consecrated and crowned, locking the entire structure into place for a new generation. By late 1936, the pyramid of Edward VIII's future reign stood nearly complete, but the final essential stone was a matter of catastrophic debate. For the government, the Church of England, and the royal family, the pyramidion was the crown, and it could only be placed upon the head of a king who upheld its sacred traditions. This meant a king with a suitable, approved queen or no queen at all. But for Edward, the structure of his life and reign was meaningless without Wallis. She was his personal pyramidion, the crowning glory of his existence. He believed that placing her by his side as queen was the only way to complete his own destiny. The clash was monumental. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, acting as the high priest of the Constitution, made the choice brutally clear. The king could not place this foreign, twice-divorced stone atop the ancient British monument. The structure would not bear it. The nation would not accept it. The dominions, the pillars of the empire, had already signaled their dissent. There was no path for Wallis to become queen. The final choice was not about love, but about architecture. Would he complete the pyramid as tradition demanded, or would he abandon the entire construction for the capstone of his own choosing? In a series of tense, grim meetings at Fort Belvedere, the final blows were struck. Edward was told in no uncertain terms that the government would resign if he persisted. The king was isolated, trapped between the monolithic weight of his inheritance and the singular consuming love for one woman. The Pyramidion of the crown lay on one side and Wallis on the other. He could not have both. His decision would determine whether the monument would be capped and consecrated or left unfinished, a testament to a king who refused to place the final stone. Once the Great Pyramid was encased in a gleaming mantle of polished Tura limestone, reflecting the sun with a brilliance visible for miles. After the abdication, the newly created Duke and Duchess of Windsor sought to build their own, smaller monument, encasing their exiled lives in a similar, polished mantle of glamour, celebrity, and high fashion. From their bases in Paris and the French countryside, they curated a public image of impeccable style and sophisticated leisure. They were fixtures in international high society, their homes decorated with fashionable flair, their parties legendary, their every move chronicled by a fascinated press. This was their gleaming casing stone, a carefully constructed facade designed to project a life of modern, romantic perfection, a life far more desirable than the stuffy, duty-bound existence they had left behind. Wallis, now the Duchess, finally had the stage she craved, becoming a global icon of style. The Duke, for his part, played the role of the devoted husband, a man who had sacrificed everything for love. Yet, beneath this polished surface, the stones were not perfectly joined. Cracks began to appear. The most significant was the royal family's decree that while the Duke was His Royal Highness, the Duchess would be denied the title. This perceived slight was a source of deep and lasting bitterness, a constant reminder that their gleaming mantle was not recognized by the institution they had abandoned. Further cracks appeared with their ill-advised 1937 visit to Nazi Germany, where they met with Adolf Hitler. This act permanently tarnished their image, casting a dark shadow of political naivety and questionable judgment over their glamorous facade. Their polished life, for all its couture and celebrity, was a mantle hiding a core of resentment, political irrelevance, and a profound sense of loss. They had their love, but the gleaming structure they built around it felt hollow. A brilliant but empty tomb, reflecting a glory that was no longer theirs. The British monarchy is more than just a crown. It is a sacred complex, an interconnected landscape of ritual and responsibility. Its temples are the great palaces, Buckingham, Windsor, Balmoral. Its ceremonial boats are the vessels of state, navigating the waters of diplomacy and tradition. And its causeway is the unyielding forward path of duty and succession, linking one generation to the next. When Edward VIII chose Wallis Simpson, he chose to step off this causeway and leave the sacred complex entirely. He abandoned the temples he was born to inhabit and forsook the symbolic boats he was meant to command. His abdication was not just a personal choice, it was a seismic event that sent tremors throughout the entire complex. His younger brother Albert was never meant to be king. A shy man with a debilitating stammer, he was suddenly thrust from his quiet life onto the causeway, forced to become King George VI and lead the nation through the looming threat of World War II. The weight of this unexpected duty was immense, a burden passed from a brother who refused it. The complex had to be reconsecrated. George VI, with his wife Queen Elizabeth, worked tirelessly to restore the stability and dignity of the monarchy, reinforcing the foundations that Edward had so willingly fractured. Meanwhile, Edward and Wallis, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, found themselves adrift. They wandered the world, untethered from the sacred geography of their birthright. Their journeys were not voyages of state, but the restless travels of the wealthy and unoccupied. They built their own mini-complexes in France and America. But these were secular temples of society and style, lacking the spiritual and constitutional authority of the ones they had left behind. They were forever looking back down the causeway, a path now closed to them, haunted by the echoes from a sacred complex, where they had become little more than cautionary tales, ghosts of a king and his would-be queen. The final decades of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor were a masterclass in gilded exile. Their court was not one of state, but of society, held in their Parisian mansion in the Bois de Boulogne. Yet, this life, however luxurious, was a form of entombment. They were relics of a past the British monarchy desperately wanted to forget. A pharaoh and his queen sealed away from the kingdom they once represented. When King George VI died in 1952, the Duke's own brother, the man who took the throne he abandoned, was gone. His niece, Elizabeth, was now queen. The Duke watched the coronation on television, a ghost at a feast he was not invited to. The finality of his decision, made 16 years prior, had never been starker. He was an outsider, a footnote in the grand procession of history he was born to lead. Their life became a repeating cycle of parties, travel, and carefully curated appearances, a performance of relevance that masked a profound emptiness. They were famous for being famous, their abdication story their only real currency. As the years wore on, the tomb of their exile grew colder. Friends passed away, the world changed, and they remained frozen in time, the couple who gave up an empire for love. In the late 1960s, Edward's health began its terminal decline. Diagnosed with throat cancer, the once vibrant Prince of Wales became frail. The final journey began not with a grand procession, but with a quiet, creeping illness. His world shrank to the confines of their home, with Wallis as his constant if demanding warden. In May 1972, Queen Elizabeth II made a historic visit to their Paris home, a brief, formal meeting that served as a final, quiet reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement, a closing of the circle before the inevitable end. Just days later, the Duke died. His body was flown back to Britain, sealing the final chapter. He was laid to rest, not among kings at Westminster, but in the royal burial ground at Frogmore, near Windsor. His tomb was sealed, a permanent monument to a king who chose a different destiny, forever entombed with the woman for whom he sacrificed everything. For decades after their deaths, the story of Edward and Wallis existed in a carefully constructed void, shaped by their own memoirs and the official narrative of the royal family. It was a simple, powerful myth, the king who chose love over duty. But history is never static. Like archaeologists using modern scans to see inside a sealed sarcophagus, historians began to access previously classified archives, private letters, and government documents, revealing a far more complex and troubling picture. These new discoveries sent echoes out of the void, challenging the very foundation of the fairy tale. Perhaps the most damning of these revelations were the Marburg Files, captured German documents that detailed Operation Willy, a Nazi plot to kidnap the Duke in 1940 and reinstall him as a puppet king. The files exposed the Duke's ill-advised meetings with high-ranking Nazis and his naive, if not sympathetic, views towards Hitler's regime. The modern scan of these documents revealed a man whose political judgment was, at best, disastrously poor, and at worst, dangerously misguided. The love story itself came under new scrutiny. The unsealing of their private correspondence revealed a relationship that was not always the romantic idyll they projected. The letters contained evidence of a complex dynamic, filled with obsession, control, and a surprising degree of cruelty. Wallis's sharp tongue and Edward's almost pathetic devotion were laid bare. Biographers, armed with this new evidence, began to paint a different portrait. They discovered a man ill-suited to the throne, desperate for an escape, with Wallis Simpson providing the perfect, dramatic exit. They found a woman driven by ambition, who may have been trapped by the very king she had captivated. These new discoveries did not erase the love story, but they added dark, unsettling layers. The void of their curated legacy was being filled with uncomfortable truths, showing that the abdication was not just a matter of the heart, but a tangled web of political naivety, personal ambition, and psychological complexity that continues to be debated and reinterpreted to this day. After the Duke's death in 1972, the silence from the British royal family, which had defined much of the couple's exile, became absolute. For Wallis, the Duchess of Windsor, the decades that followed were not a gentle twilight, but a slow, tragic plunder of her life and legacy. Now a widow, her health began to fail. She retreated into their Paris mansion, a prisoner of her own past, surrounded by the opulent treasures she and Edward had amassed. As dementia took hold, her world shrank, and she became increasingly vulnerable. This vulnerability was allegedly exploited by her French lawyer, Maître Suzanne Blum. Acting with power of attorney, Blum took control of the Duchess's affairs, isolating her from old friends and, according to many reports, beginning a systematic plunder of her fortune. Friends who tried to visit were turned away. The Duchess, once a formidable social titan, was now a ghost in her own home, her voice silenced by illness and legal guardianship. The story goes that Blum sold off assets, jewels, and furniture, allegedly for her own benefit, while the Duchess lived in a state of confused isolation. This period represents a personal plundering, a stripping away of her autonomy and wealth in her final defenseless years. When Wallis died in 1986, the plunder became public. The contents of her life, the physical embodiment of their love story in exile, were put up for auction. The 1987 Sotheby's auction in Geneva was a global media event. Jewels of staggering value, love tokens from a king, furniture, paintings, and personal mementos were sold to the highest bidder. Their private world was dismantled and scattered, each piece a relic plundered from their sealed-off life. The royal family maintained its stoic silence throughout, a continuation of the institutional wall built in 1936. They accepted her body for burial beside the Duke at Frogmore, a final quiet act of closure. But in the decades of her widowhood, Wallis's life was picked apart, first privately by those she trusted, and then publicly by a world hungry for a piece of their myth. It was a sad, lonely end for the woman who had shaken an empire to its core. What, then, is the final legacy of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor? It is not a simple monument, but a complex and controversial structure set in stone within the annals of the 20th century. Their story remains an enduring wonder, not for its beauty, but for its profound and lasting impact on the British monarchy and our collective fascination with the clash between public duty and private desire. Their tomb at Frogmore, a simple stone slab lying in the shadow of Windsor Castle, is the physical embodiment of this legacy, forever close to the heart of the institution, yet eternally separate from it. On one hand, their legacy is one of dereliction. Edward VIII is the king who walked away. He abandoned his sacred duty for a woman his government and people would not accept as queen, plunging the monarchy into its greatest crisis since the Glorious Revolution. His actions were seen as selfish, reckless, and a betrayal of the trust placed in him by birthright. His later political dalliances with the Nazis have permanently stained his reputation, casting a dark shadow over the Romantic narrative. Yet paradoxically, his abdication may have saved the monarchy. His temperament was ill-suited for the looming storm of World War II. His brother George VI, alongside Queen Elizabeth, provided the steadfast, dutiful leadership the nation needed during its darkest hour. Edward's departure allowed for the rise of a more stable and respected monarchy, one that would eventually be passed to his niece, Queen Elizabeth II, who would go on to define the role for 70 years. Their story also created the blueprint for the modern celebrity royal. They were the first to live out their royal drama on a global stage, scrutinized by a relentless press. They navigated a life of exile, funded by their fame, a path that other royals who have stepped away from official duties would later tread. Their love story, however flawed and complex, has been cemented in our culture as the ultimate romance or the ultimate folly, depending on one's perspective. This is their legacy in stone, a permanent, unmovable part of royal history that serves as a cautionary tale, a tragic romance, and a constitutional turning point. It remains an enduring wonder, a story we continue to tell and retell, forever captivated by the king who gave up a kingdom for love.